the dream of a lifetime, a trip aboard the space shuttle. Coming up on Newton's Apple, astronaut Jeff Hoffman shares the adventure of his first voyage into space. Also some down-to-earth but out-of-this-world inventions. All this and more, next on Newton's Apple.
Welcome to Newton's Apple. Newton's Apple is made possible by a grant from DuPont, makers of better things for better living, and also by this station and other public television stations. And now your host, National Public Radio science correspondent Ira Plato.
Thank you. Welcome again to Newton's Apple. Do you wonder about nature, marvel at technology, or the human body? Or you're just curious about the world around you? Well, that's what we're here for, to answer your questions. And today, we're going to respond to everyone who has asked us about space travel. We're going to hear firsthand what it feels like to float free of Mother Earth. Meet Dr. Jeff Hoffman, astronaut and physicist who has completed his first ride aboard the space shuttle. Welcome back to the program, Jeff. Good to see you.
Ira, it's nice to be here.
And how was that ride?
Oh, Ira, it was the experience of a lifetime, and it was worth waiting for. You know, we got to launch 2 satellites like we were expecting to do, but also I got to take an unplanned spacewalk. We rendezvoused with a satellite. It was phenomenal.
Well, before we get into the details of this mission, you just didn't become an astronaut overnight. It took many years of intensive training, didn't it?
Well, something I've wanted to do ever since I was about 6, and I've been working with NASA for almost 7 years now. So yeah, it took a lot of training. There were a lot of things to learn, and we got to use almost all of that during our flight.
In fact, if you've been watching this program for the past few years, you've witnessed some of the intensive training Jeff Hoffman needed to fulfill his mission in space. When we first met Jeff a few years ago, he was in the middle of training for his first mission in space. Mission training is designed to teach an astronaut how to live and work under conditions much different than on Earth. In the weightlessness of Earth orbit, astronauts have to relearn old skills. Getting the drawer back in, because you say we're in zero gravity. Now, what would, if I tried to push it in and I weren't tethered, right?
You'd go floating back over towards the airlock.
So a simple task like that becomes very difficult to do, right?
Using one hand to do things becomes very difficult. Now, what I would do if I had to push this thing in and I were weightless is I'd grab onto this with one hand, I'd grab on here with the other hand so that I can pull myself in, and then to keep my body restrained, you know, just underneath here, there's a place where you can put your feet underneath, and I would basically then get a toe hold on, and my body is now restrained. I can then reach up and push it in with no trouble.
But most importantly, astronauts need to understand the inner workings of the orbiter itself, so they spend a lot of time in simulators built to look and act like the shuttle. It takes hours and hours of training in these simulators before astronauts are thoroughly prepared to carry out the tasks assigned to them. One of Jeff Hoffman's specific duties was to be prepared for an emergency spacewalk should one ever be necessary. Getting fitted for his spacesuit was only the first step.
Does that feel pretty good?
Feels pretty good.
In an underwater tank that simulates weightlessness, Hoffman practiced making emergency repairs on the shuttle.
Dave, does it look like it's in there?
Yeah. Turn it.
Okay.
He became comfortable with the workings of his spacesuit on which his life depended.
You know, the environment that we're working in space is completely unforgiving of mistakes, either by people or problems with machinery. You can't survive very long without a whole bunch of things working correctly, and we know that. And that always has to be in the back of my mind when I'm training.
Okay, Jeff, now that we've seen what training is like, is it possible for you to tell us what being in space is like?
It's really difficult. Being in space, it turned out to be such a unique experience. A lot of the language we really don't have. Maybe if I can show you some of the film that I brought back, and then we can talk about it while we're looking, it'll be easier.
Good idea. Why don't we look at that?
This is the morning of the launch. Actually, 3 o'clock in the morning we got up, and we're getting into the van which will take us out to the launch pad. And the night of the launch pad is completely different from any time we had seen it before. The shuttle is full with liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. There's creaking noises. There's nobody there except for us. What we're seeing here is the start sequence when we actually start pumping that hydrogen and oxygen tons every second, Ira, into the engines. There's this big booming noise below us. You can hear the roaring. The shuttle starts to move slowly. The engines build up to full power. And then all of a sudden, after the engines get to full power, the solid rockets light, and there's this big boom, and it's like getting kicked in the back, and the thing starts to move up. The first thing I saw, I was looking out the window of the door there, and I could see the whole launch tower turn bright yellow. Now what you see here is slow motion. It all looks very smooth, but believe me, we were shaking. It was vibrating. I mean,
what's running through your mind at this point?
I was just so excited. Nothing was really running through my mind. You know, I didn't have any main responsibilities during the liftoff. I was there just to sort of enjoy the experience. I looked out the window. Here you can see us turning around. I was watching us turn. I wanted to be able to see the horizon. I was trying to prop my head up against the G-forces pulling me back. I wanted to see the blue sky of Earth turn into the blackness of space.
Is that when you know that you're in space? Is there a point when you say, I'm in space now?
Well, now that's the visual feeling, of course. Everything was black outside, so I knew I was in space, but the engines were still firing. You know, we were still accelerating. We were building up to about 3 Gs of acceleration. I was being pushed back into my chair, and so we still had a long way to go. No, it was at the end of almost 9 minutes when all of a sudden everything went quiet. And then there was just a beautiful feeling. All of a sudden, from being pushed back with 3 Gs, I was just floating gently against the straps that were holding me down, and I knew I was in space. Now, after getting used to the weightlessness of space, any acceleration you really feel. Here we are firing our small rocket engines. They only produce about a tenth of a G acceleration. Yeah, it's really impressive when you look out the window at them. But for us inside, the shuttle is accelerating forward, and so we feel the acceleration pushing us back. And here's Ray Seddon inside there. The engines are firing, but that's only a tenth of a G. You know, that's a force of probably 10, 15, 10, 12 pounds.
So you're like creating artificial gravity.
Look at the way the orange juice container was curving there, and here I am moving in, and I'm being pushed against the back.
You didn't hurt yourself, did you?
No, although you do have to be careful when you fire the engines. Now the engines have stopped, and we're in free fall again. Everything is relative. For that short period of time, there was a sort of a mini gravity of a tenth. But now we're floating around again, and there's this incredible freedom. Look at Charlie Walker in the background there. He's working on a piece of equipment. He wants to get at the bottom of it, so he just turns himself head facing the floor and to get at it. You see the camera bracket floating by if you want to pass something to somebody.
Well,
just float it by.
But you have a new control of your body. I mean, you can move so much without knowing it, you know?
Just by holding on with a little finger, you can flip your whole body around. It's the nearest you can come to being Superman without actually living on Krypton. You know, the other thing is that objects behave in such different ways.
Right.
Of course, you let go of something. There I have a pair of binoculars, and it just floats in front of my eyes. It has a little gyro moving inside it, and the friction starts it spinning around, and it was actually, we thought it was rather comical. That's why we took these pictures. It just behaved in a way we weren't expecting. These apples, too, Newton's apples, obviously.
Of course.
Here we are, it wasn't Halloween on this flight, but nevertheless we tried bobbing for apples, and it just doesn't work. There's nothing to keep the apples in place. They're just floating there, and as soon as you hit it. Now, perhaps with strawberries or grapes, it would have worked a little better. Here's what it's like taking a shower in space. You know, it's sort of the same level of cleanliness as when you go camping. You can see the water gun there. You squirt the water onto the washcloth and just use that to wash with. It's not elegant by any stretch of the imagination, but it suffices. You know what you're looking at there is the first view we got when we opened the cargo bay and we looked out. That's off the coast of Mexico. Ira, you never get tired of looking out the windows. The Earth is so beautiful, and you see it from space in a way that you've never seen it before.
Those were magnificent pictures you brought for us to see. I know there are people here who want to ask you a few questions. Do you think you could answer a few?
Sure.
Okay, let's go to the first one.
Hi, I was just wondering if there was anything that happened while you were up in space that took you totally by surprise. Maybe you weren't quite prepared for it.
Oh, lots. And I think, in fact, the most surprising thing of all was that at the end of a week-long mission, I was still seeing things which surprised me. there's just so much up there. I spent a lot of time looking out of the shuttle at night. I like to look at the stars, and the last night I was up there, I saw a meteor go underneath.
Go underneath you?
Underneath. I mean, imagine there's meteors which go way up in the sky, and there I was up in the shuttle and it went underneath. That really put me in my place.
Okay, I think we have time for one more.
We remember that your spacewalk was unscheduled. Was your training able to prepare you for that?
I wondered that myself.
You know, I spent 50 hours underwater training. I learned to do a lot of things because we wanted to be prepared for emergencies, even though I wasn't planning to go outside. Now, obviously, if I had planned to do a spacewalk, I would have had a lot more training.
Right.
But nevertheless, I was competent and confident that if we had a real shuttle emergency, we couldn't close the doors. We planned for helping to launch satellites. We planned for fix the manipulators' arms. I was ready to deal with those. I had worn my suit into a vacuum on 2 occasions. I was confident in the suit. I knew how it worked. So although I was going out to do a task for which I wasn't specifically prepared, I was confident that I could go out and do it. If you learn how to use a set of carpenter's tools and you're confident with those tools, then if someone comes up with and gives you a job to do that you've never done before, you can do that job with confidence and safety, and I think that was the point here.
You had a lot of serious things that you were doing on the shuttle, including the rescuing or trying to rescue that satellite to get it to work again. But you also had, if I'm correct, didn't you have some demonstrations with toys that you were doing?
Yeah, we actually only got to spend about an hour or 2 using those, but it was quite interesting and had an interesting purpose. I brought some of the toys here. We can go up and
I'd love to
take a look at them. I'll show you what we did.
Let's go.
Ira, I know that to you these are just toys, but in NASA everything's an acronym, so to me this is a test of youth science.
A test of youth science. Now, of course, there was more than just fun involved here. There was something actually to learn from bringing these toys in space?
Well, the idea was to teach young children who are familiar with how little things like marbles and jacks and a top and all this stuff work on the Earth, to show them how differently they behave in space, to get them thinking about the fact that, you know, there's something fundamentally different up there. Now, of course, that's interesting for kids. It also turns out to be interesting even for PhD physicists. I've talked with several people about whether or not a yo-yo would even work. I mean, you've got the elasticity of the string and the angular momentum of the yo-yo and all sorts of things. It's quite a nice physics problem to figure out how these things will actually behave.
So you're not really sure how they're going to work until you brought them up into space and watched them?
Most of them we had a pretty good idea, but the best way, of course, is to actually try them, and I have some footage which we brought back. Why don't we watch that, and I can describe to you how all these things worked.
All right, now the first thing we see here, oh, there's the yo-yo.
And as you can see, it worked brilliantly. Now, the neat thing about the yo-yo is you could do it so slowly that you
Look
could
at
actually,
that.
you could follow the dynamics of the yo-yo and the string and make it do
Yeah.
all sorts of tricks which were totally beyond our capabilities on the ground. The yo-yo was really fun. Now, jacks, the most difficult thing was to let them go. You can't put them on the ground, and they just sort of
Right.
float all around. And of
Right.
course, normally you can't bounce the ball off the ceiling either. She did get her 12sies by the end. A slinky is basically governed by its own internal spring forces, and so a lot of these patterns don't look that different from what you could do on Earth, but notice it doesn't sag at
No,
all
it
between
doesn't.
our 2 hands, so that you can really see the patterns very clearly.
Those beautiful waves it's making.
Yeah, it was quite fascinating, although I'd say there was not all that much difference in the way it behaved in space.
I have enough trouble getting my slinky just to go down steps at home.
Of course, it doesn't go down steps in space. Centrifugal force operates in space just like it does on the ground, and that keeps the car in its track. But on the ground, by the time it was going this slow, it long ago would have fallen out. And here it just
yes.
stays in. I give it a little help at the end to get it to go out.
Of course, I know you had a lot of fun with the toys, but I'm sure the most fun you had was the spacewalk that you took, right?
Oh, I mean, that spacewalk was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. That was the high point of the mission for me. You realize that the main task that we had in our mission was to launch 2 communication satellites. The first one worked fine, but the second one, after we launched it, for some reason it didn't activate. Now, people on the ground spent a lot of time trying to figure out why that might be, and the most likely cause turned out to be that a little switch, which should have opened when it left the shuttle, perhaps didn't open all the way. And then they spent some more time thinking about what could we do about it. We didn't have any special tools or anything. They came up with this idea.
Look at that.
Well, it's a tool which, for reasons you can see, we came to call a fly swatter.
Is this the actual tool that you used?
No, this is a model they built on the ground while they were developing the concept. They had no way of telling us, of showing us exactly what to build. They could describe it in words, and then we used a lot of equipment which we had on board. This is a plastic from a book cover, gray tape, aluminum rod which we cut with a bone saw, needle and thread. I mean, it was a real sort of do-it-yourself.
Really? It was catch as catch can here.
We had 2 devices which we made, and the idea was that we were going to fly up to the satellite to do a rendezvous in space, and then reach out with this tool and grab onto that switch and pull on it to try to trigger the satellite and get it working again. Now, we were going to reach out by using the 50-foot long remote manipulator arm and have this mounted on the end of it so that we could then try to grab the satellite.
So you had to then attach this to the manipulator arm then,
Right, well, we made it inside the cabin, and the idea then was it was the job of me and Dave Griggs to put on our spacesuits, take these outside, and attach them, and it's because of that that we got to do this spacewalk, which was such an exciting thing. I'd like to show you some of the pictures of that because that's the best way to understand how thrilling it really was.
I'd love to see. There you are, getting in with, what, 2 feet at once?
You can put 2 feet in your pants at the same time when you're floating around in weightlessness. The suit is still a little bit clumsy, and it was luckily that we had spent so much time on the ground training in how to use it so that we knew exactly what we could and couldn't do with a spacesuit, and that was critical.
And I can see there are stripes on your pants. That's why.
Well, that's for identification. I had stripes and Dave Griggs didn't. And here is that wonderful first moment when I opened the hatch and actually emerged into the vacuum of space.
It's beautiful.
The first thing I saw was the sun setting, but of course you've got to concentrate on the task. It would have been easy just to get totally carried away by the experience, but we had very serious work to do out there.
Now, what, you're now at the end of the manipulator arm and attaching the fly swatter.
We took the fly swatters down there, and the difficult thing here is that, for instance, you try to put the fly swatter on the end of the arm, and it wants to float away. And
well, how do you get it on? You're not going to drill it or screw it in or anything like that?
We had a little strap, which about 1 inch wide, which we wrapped around 3 times and then tightened up. The hard part is everything wants to float away. There's nothing to fix ourselves onto. If you try to push with one hand, your body floats away. So it really required a certain amount of choreography, which we planned in advance. Notice the earth behind us, how beautiful it is. I have to admit, every once in a while, I just had to stop work for just a moment and look over my shoulder. I remember one time when we actually flew over Houston, and I just said to the people on the ground, I'm going to stop for a minute and take a look. I'm sure they'll forgive me. And actually, towards the end of the flight, I was quite lucky because we had to take the arm over to the other side to check its clearance, and that left me quite a while where I could just hold onto the side and watch the Earth go by and almost feel like I was a separate satellite floating on there beside the shuttle. It was really like a magical experience, the closest, most intimate experience of the whole environment of space that I think I had in the course of the whole flight.
And then what's happening?
Well, at the end, before we got back in, our friends inside told us, since we had just completed this first unplanned spacewalk in NASA's history, we ought to turn around and take a bow for the TV audience. And well, you can see taking a bow in weightlessness is a little different from doing it on the ground.
Of course, the satellite, I mean, no matter what you tried to do, you could not reactivate the satellite.
Well,
on
we
that
did
try,
succeed
right?
in pulling the switch, and we were very pleased that everything we had done worked, but that turned out not to be the problem.
And you're fortunate enough that you're going back into space, aren't you?
I don't know, I can't think of anything I would rather
I'm so
do
jealous.
to fly in space. It is fantastic. I'll be going on an astronomy flight next. It'll be completely different from this flight, but it'll be another wonderful experience, I'm sure. I'm an astronomer. To be able to study the stars from space, anytime you get a chance to go up into space, it's the greatest thing you can imagine.
Well, I just get the tingles listening to you talking about it and watching it here. Thank you very much for coming. This has been an out-of-this-world experience for all of us. Thanks again. We'll be back in a minute. Do you have a science question you'd like answered on Newton's Apple? If so, write us. Send your question to Newton's Apple, Box 1983, St. Paul, Minnesota 55111. Remember, our show depends on your questions. And now let's tackle a more down-to-earth question. For example, what's the easiest way to open a can of soda? Lift the tab, of course, right? But some people don't like the easy way of doing things. To them, pulling the tab is no challenge. They would rather make life more difficult. And they spend a lot of time and energy doing it. Purdue University, West Lafayette, Indiana. A place steeped in scholarship and learning. And the place where each year students disappear into their basements and workshops to compete in the Rube Goldberg machine contest. What's this all about? Well, the man who inspired this contest was Rube Goldberg, a cartoonist who became famous in the 1940s for drawing wacky, complicated machines designed to perform simple tasks. Yeah! At Purdue, the contestants not only design them, they have to build them too. This year's seemingly simple challenge, to open a can of soda. One of the contestants, Stephen Boyd, demonstrated his Goldberg-inspired invention.
Let's give it a try and see if it works. And keep our fingers crossed.
Unfortunately, at this point, the circumnavigational operational cola extractor broke down. The scissors failed to cut the cord to release the hammer to open the can. Meanwhile, two other contenders had taken a more systematic approach to the cola cracking problem, but even that didn't guarantee success.
And we ran into a few problems when we tried to go from our papers, the papers that we'd written up, to the building. We used an antique train, and it would want to go backwards, and it would want to go forwards, and we never knew which way it was going to go. So we finally just took it apart, took the transformer apart, and did some work on it, and got it to work right, and now it usually works.
Usually works.
Wire broke.
Yes, another cola had beaten the Rube Goldberg challenge. It was back to the drawing board for these two. Now, the final group really put its heads together. 19 of them worked on this machine. As team coordinator Tony Frissora was eager to point out, his machine was governed by some sound scientific principles.
We have two probes here which measure the resistance of shaving cream. Now, shaving cream, if you take a look at it, it doesn't look like it would conduct electricity, but manufacturers amazingly put electrons inside this, and electrons can flow through the shaving cream and make a circuit when you have two nails in it.
But how does it actually work?
It all starts by putting a penny into the Mickey Mouse bank.
Triumph at last, a machine that gets the job done. And just in case you didn't catch it all the first time around, here's an instant replay of the final moments of success. The only thing to work out now is how to get the cola out of the can and into your mouth. Well, do you find yourself saying after watching this, I could invent a gadget as good as that or better? Well, seriously, we'd like to see you try. We're not necessarily asking for a Rube Goldberg type of invention, but we are looking for any invention, crazy or serious, big or small, that you think could revolutionize life as we know it, or just simply make better toast, if you'd like. Now, we've got lots of examples of inventions here. It could be something as creative but simple as this burglar alarm. Watch this. Like that, there's a little buzzer right at the top there. Or it could be something as useful, I guess this must be useful, as this handy glove. Or as earth-shaking, watch this one, you're going to like this, as this wind-powered fishing rod, huh? Who can live without this baby? Now, if you dare, send us a picture of your invention. Do not send the invention. We have no room for all the inventions here in the studios. Just a picture of it and details, a diagram or something explaining what it does and how it works. Send it all to Inventions, Newton's Apple, Post Office Box 1983, St. Paul, Minnesota 55111. Now, we'll pick out our favorite, and we'll bring them right here on the program and let everybody see what you've done. That's about all the time we have for now. We'll see you next time on Newton's Apple.
Newton's Apple is made possible by a grant from DuPont, supporting an interest in science today so that future generations may continue to enjoy better things for better living. And also by this station and other public television stations.
This program has been recommended by the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers.